At that time, I still hadn't realized the gravity of the situation. On our days off, my son, Bob, would go out, and I would stay home with Nancy, and she would always see him off with a big smile.
Bye, Daddy. Make sure to catch lots of fish.
But Bob wouldn't even look back as he left the house. Seeing my granddaughter look so sad broke my heart, and I thought I'd need to have a serious talk with him someday. It was one of those typical days off. After we finished lunch and Nancy had gone down for her nap, the phone rang loudly in the house.
Is this the Turner household? This is the police.
The police.
Am I speaking with the family of Bob Turner?
After hearing the situation, my legs gave out, and before I knew it, I collapsed right there. Bob had been swept away by the waves. He was missing. What will happen to Nancy? I was lost in thought, unable to keep up with my own mind.
Do you think Daddy will be home soon?
I squeezed Nancy's hand tightly. 3 years later, it's finally Nancy's first day of school. I headed to the elementary school with Nancy, who was proudly wearing her new light blue backpack. Nancy spotted a friend from her preschool and smiled shyly when their eyes met. After the assembly, as we headed to her first classroom, I suddenly saw a familiar figure in front of me. The man looked just like Bob. Beside him was a mother holding hands with a little boy, both looking cheerful. It must just be a coincidence, right? As I was watching them, Nancy tugged at my sleeve.
Grandma, what should I do with my shoes?
Okay. I helped Nancy find her locker and change into her indoor shoes. By the time we headed to the classroom, that family had disappeared. My name is Rebecca Turner. I'm about to turn 63 years old. Today, I'm here by the sea with my son Bob and his daughter, Nancy, for a day of fishing. Bob is sitting alone on the pier, casting his line into the water. Nancy is next to me, splashing her hands in the bucket of seawater we collected. It's so hot. Even though it's only May, I can feel the sun burning my skin.
Grandma, are you okay?
Nancy looked up at me, her face full of concern. I didn't think I was that old yet, but to her young eyes, I must have looked like I was struggling. I'm fine, sweetie, thank you. I smiled at her, and she quickly turned her face away, running off toward her father.
Daddy.
Bob let Nancy hold the fishing rod, placing his hands over hers. It looked like he was protecting her from everything, holding her close from behind. That day, Bob had suddenly shown up at my house with Nancy. Her mother had left with another man. When they got married, when Nancy was on the way, and even after she was born, Nancy's mom was always smiling. I never would have imagined she'd leave with another man, but it happened. It was just when I had gotten used to living alone after losing my husband and seeing Bob leave the house. I'd just started to enjoy my freedom and time to myself. But before I knew it, I was suddenly living with my son and granddaughter again. Bob doted on Nancy, but sometimes his face would cloud over unexpectedly. Maybe it was because Nancy looked so much like her mother. I couldn't tell if it was lingering feelings or resentment. Only Bob can truly understand his own feelings. After tracking down the woman who left their daughter behind and having a conversation with her, Bob didn't look happy at all. He had gained custody and decided to raise his daughter on his own. Nancy would grow up without even knowing her mother existed. It had been nearly 2 years since we started living together as a family. Bob had always loved the outdoors. Back in college, he joined a camping club, and before I knew it, the house was filling up with camping gear. Even now, on his days off, he would take us outside to enjoy the fresh air. I'm sure he'd love to go on overnight camping trips, but with a 2-year-old daughter and a mother in her 60s, it's tough. So, we've settled into a routine of going fishing at this pier, which is just about an hour from home. I sometimes think that if I were just a bit younger, but honestly, I'm starting to worry about my stamina. I'd much rather spend time relaxing in a cool room. When Nancy gets a little older, I hope the two of them can go out and enjoy themselves to the fullest. A year later, Nancy started preschool. With more time to myself during the day, I finally had a bit of freedom to unwind. This must be how all the other moms manage their lives with kids. I might have been like that once, but it's been so long that I can hardly remember. I'd prepare a meal I liked for lunch, take a quick nap, and then head off to pick Nancy up from preschool. By the time Bob got home, I'd have dinner ready, and we'd all gather around the table. On the weekends, we'd go out and do things together. Isn't that the picture-perfect image of a family? Even without a mother, we were functioning just fine. I thought this happy life would continue forever. One morning on a day off, as Bob was getting ready for another fishing trip, Nancy started to fuss. She'd never acted like this before, so I was surprised.
"What's wrong, Nancy? Let's go fishing with Daddy."
Bob spoke to her in his gentle voice.
No. I want to stay home.
Her face was about to burst into tears as she stomped her feet. But Grandma's going to. I joked, but that only made the tears spill from Nancy's eyes. This wasn't good. She's not usually one to throw tantrums. Something was definitely up. Before she could start wailing, I turned to Bob. "I'll stay home with her today." But before I could finish, Bob cut me off and grabbed Nancy's hand roughly. He yanked her toward the door, dragging her while she cried. "Bob, stop." I pulled Nancy away from him, holding her tightly as I scolded him. "Don't pull on a little girl's hand like that." I told Bob that there was no point in forcing Nancy to go if she didn't want to, and if he wanted to go so badly, he could go alone.
Humph.
Bob stomped out of the house, making a show of his frustration. Nancy stared after him in shock as he sulked his way out the door. "It's okay, Nancy. I'm sure Daddy will be in a better mood by the time he comes back." There was no real guarantee of that, but at the time, I believed it would be fine. To help calm Nancy down, I asked her why she suddenly didn't want to go. She'd never acted like this before.
At preschool, I like to draw.
At first, I didn't understand what she meant, but it seemed Nancy preferred staying indoors. Now that I think about it, her preschool teacher had mentioned something like that. I'd have to talk to Bob about it when he got back. And so, Nancy and I enjoyed our day off at home. When Bob returned, he just nodded silently as I spoke, didn't apologize to Nancy, and quickly went off to take a shower alone. Nancy looked a bit guilty, but it wasn't something she needed to worry about. It's okay. I still hadn't realized how serious things were. From that day on, I saw less and less of Bob spending time with Nancy. They still ate and slept together as usual, but when the weekends came, Bob started going out on his own. I didn't force Nancy to go with him because I wanted her to do what she enjoyed. In fact, I thought Bob, as her father, should have taken more interest in what Nancy liked to do. But whenever I tried to bring it up, Bob's mood would sour. He never raised a hand to either of us, but his movements became noticeably harsher. Like a child sulking. Nancy must have sensed something was off, because whenever Bob left the house on weekends, she would cheerfully send him off.
Bye, Daddy. Catch lots of fish.
But Bob, as always, would leave in silence, showing no interest in his daughter's sweet gestures.
Do you think Daddy doesn't like me anymore?
It was a Saturday morning when Nancy murmured those sad words. I couldn't just stand by any longer. Daddy could never stop loving you. I tried to encourage her and asked what she wanted to play.
Drawing.
She lit up with a bright smile and immediately started drawing something in her sketchbook with crayons. How could Bob ignore such a sweet child? It's bad enough that she doesn't have her mother, and now her father's ignoring her too. I have to understand her sadness and fears. I was determined to sit down and talk seriously with Bob when he came home that evening. Just as Nancy was napping after lunch, the phone rang loudly in the house. These days, with cell phones everywhere, it's rare for someone I know to call the house. It's probably another spam call. Hello. I answered the phone bluntly. I was ready to say, "We don't need anything." As soon as the person on the other end started their pitch, but instead, I heard a business-like voice.
Is this the Turner household? This is the police.
What? My voice cracked in surprise at the unexpected caller. The police. What in the world could be happening?
Am I speaking to the family of Bob Turner?
Sensing my confusion, or maybe just used to situations like this, the officer on the other end spoke a bit slower. Yes, has something happened to Bob? When I heard the details, my legs gave out, and I collapsed right there. I could hardly believe what the officer was telling me. I almost thought it was a prank.
Are you okay?
I couldn't even respond to the officer's concerned voice. Bob had been swept away by the waves. He was missing. I was told to come to the police station to complete some paperwork, and then the call ended. How long did I sit there, stunned?
Grandma? What's wrong?
Nancy, who had just woken up from her nap, was rubbing her eyes as she slid open the door to the living room. What will happen to Nancy? I tried to think, but my mind couldn't keep up.
Do you think Daddy will be home soon?
On the table in front of me was a drawing Nancy had done this morning. In it, she and Bob were holding hands, smiling happily. Then it hit me. At the very least, I have to protect Nancy's smile. This sweet granddaughter in front of me, I have to keep her safe. I didn't know what had happened to my son, but I couldn't let Nancy feel scared. She couldn't see me falling apart. I pulled myself together, took Nancy's hand, and headed for the police station. On the way back from the station, I tried to speak cheerfully to Nancy. But her face remained gloomy. She was only 3 years old. Or maybe already 3. She could probably sense the gravity of the situation, even if she didn't fully understand it. That her dad wasn't coming back. It's okay, Nancy. I tried to comfort her, but my words trailed off because I had no certainty that Bob was safe. Even though we filed a missing person report, if he's been swept away by the waves. If they don't find him soon, I can already imagine the worst outcome. When we got home, neither of us had any appetite, and we ended up falling asleep, huddled together. Please, let there be news by tomorrow morning. Please, let me see Bob and Nancy laughing together again. That's all I wished for. But reality was cruel, and no matter how much time passed, there was no news of Bob's safety. Eventually, Nancy started waking up in the middle of the night, becoming sensitive to any noise. She would rush to check every little sound, thinking her dad might have come home. This is too much. It wasn't just Nancy, I wasn't in a good mental state either. Before I lost the ability to think clearly, I sat down to talk to Nancy. Nancy, Daddy isn't coming home anymore. I tried not to use harsh words. He's gone very far away. I felt like Nancy's eyes changed as she looked at me. Staying here will only make us sadder, so why don't we move to a new home with Grandma? I wasn't sure if I was saying it for her or convincing myself. But we couldn't stay like this forever. Sometimes, you have to find the courage to move forward. Nancy nodded without saying a word. She was still too young to fully understand everything. That's why I had to be the one to support her. So, I let go of the house and land my husband had left behind, and Nancy and I started a new life somewhere else. It's been 3 years since we moved to this place, where we had no prior connections. This spring, Nancy will start elementary school. When we first moved, Nancy spoke very little and kept to herself, but with the support of so many kind people, she gradually started smiling more.
I'm going to give this to my teacher tomorrow.
Tomorrow is her preschool graduation. Nancy was happily writing a thank you card to her teacher. That teacher had been so understanding of our situation since we moved and had been with Nancy all the way through preschool. Her friends at preschool were kind and cheerful, and I felt like we had made the right choice coming here. After Nancy fell asleep, I stared at Bob's picture. Where did you go? I still believed my son was alive somewhere. They hadn't found a body or even a single item of his belongings. I couldn't bring myself to accept his death when everything was still so uncertain. With a sigh, I slipped into the bed next to Nancy, who was fast asleep. A few days later, it was finally Nancy's first day of school. I headed to the elementary school with Nancy, who was proudly wearing her new light blue backpack. As we arrived at the main gate, some moms from Nancy's preschool greeted us. While chatting and heading to the gym, I noticed a few new first graders and their parents scattered around. Nancy spotted a friend from her preschool and shyly smiled when their eyes met. After the assembly, as we walked toward her new classroom, I suddenly saw a familiar figure. The man looked just like Bob. Next to him was a mother holding hands with an excited little boy. It must just be a coincidence, right? As I watched, Nancy tugged on my sleeve.
Grandma, what should I do with my shoes?
Okay. I helped Nancy find her locker and change into her indoor shoes. By the time we headed to the classroom, that family had disappeared. The boy seemed to be the same age as Nancy, and there was no way Bob would be here. Lately, I've been staring at his picture late at night, so I must be reacting to every little thing. Calming myself down, I held Nancy's hand and entered the classroom. I helped Nancy find her seat, then stood at the back of the room. Glancing around, the man I'd seen earlier was nowhere to be found. Guess I'm overthinking it. I absent-mindedly watched Nancy as she sat up straight, listening carefully to the teacher's instructions. Once the orientation ended, everyone was free to go. After taking a few photos with friends from preschool, we changed our shoes and were about to head home when another friend called out to us. They suggested taking a commemorative photo with the first day of school banner at the school entrance in the background. The kids were already excited, gathering in front of the banner and striking cute poses.
Rebecca, let's get a picture of you and Nancy too.
One of the moms offered, so I stood with Nancy, and we got our photo taken. Come to think of it, this might be the first time Nancy and I have taken a picture together. Now, I'll take one for you. When I called to the same mom and was about to take a picture of her and her child, I saw a man running out of the school gates. It was the same man whose back I had seen in the classroom earlier. This time, I saw his face clearly, and I couldn't mistake it. It was Bob. As he ran off, the boy called after him,
Daddy, be careful.
Then, a gentle-looking woman walked up from behind them. I couldn't just leave Nancy to chase after him, and frustration welled up inside me. After saying a quick goodbye to the other moms, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I had just taken. Maybe he's in one of the photos.
Grandma,
Nancy's voice snapped me out of my farts. Before I knew it, the other moms had already left, and I was standing alone in front of the banner. Nancy tugged on my arm and pointed in a direction. There, I saw the boy who had called out to Bob and his mother.
Are we in the way?
The woman gave a polite, slightly apologetic look. That's when an idea hit me. I'm sorry, I got a bit distracted.
Oh, it's no problem.
Even though I was clearly in their way, she didn't seem bothered at all. And then I decided to act on my idea. Would you like me to take a picture for you?
Oh, really? That'd be great.
The woman smiled warmly. After taking a photo of the boy and his mother, I made another suggestion, trying not to sound too forced. How about we take a picture of just the kids? It felt a bit awkward after I said it. Why would I suggest taking a picture of kids who just met? I was hoping to ask her about the man who had run off earlier, or rather, Bob. I regretted my suggestion, but I tried to keep my composure. To my surprise, the woman responded enthusiastically.
That's a great idea. Let's do it.
Her name was Emily Grant, and her son was named Charlie. As we talked, I learned that she lived close to where Nancy and I were staying, so we decided to walk home together.
We just moved here recently, and I was feeling a bit nervous.
Emily said with a shy smile. It seems like they are in different classes, but let's keep in touch. Nancy and Charlie were walking ahead of us, laughing and chatting. I wished we could just be friends, without anything involving Bob. I felt a little guilty for my ulterior motives, but I had to ask her something. When we arrived at Emily's apartment building, I gathered the courage to ask for her contact information. I'm raising Nancy on my own, so it'd be great to connect with younger moms like you and share tips. Emily gladly gave me her number, then she and Charlie disappeared into the building. They had done nothing wrong. I prayed that I was mistaken. That Charlie's dad was just someone who looked like Bob. I couldn't stop hoping that's all it was. A few days later, I decided to send Emily a message. Since the first graders didn't have lunch at school yet, they would be coming home before noon. I made plans to meet Emily on the way to pick them up together. Ironically, we seemed to get along quite well. We never ran out of things to talk about when we were together. Nancy and Charlie got along too, and before long, we started going to the park together more often. That's when I learned more about her husband. Emily's husband was away on a long business trip and wasn't living at home at the moment. He had only come back for Charlie's first day of the school and would be returning soon.
He's going to be transferred to the local branch soon, so he'll finally be done with all these business trips.
Emily said happily. I asked how she and her husband met, and what she told me shocked me.
Actually, my current husband isn't Charlie's biological father.
Charlie's real father had died in a tragic accident when he was just a baby. She had met her current husband at work. And over time, their relationship had grown closer.
I haven't really told many people about this.
Emily said, lowering her voice a little.
But my husband, he doesn't have any memory of his past.
The revelation hit me like a blow. How is that possible? I found myself saying aloud. But Emily didn't seem to catch my reaction.
I couldn't believe it at first either.
One day, he had been found clinging to a pier, rescued by a local, and eventually reintegrated into society. I was sure now her husband was Bob. But I had no proof. If he really had lost his memory and was now living a happy life with Emily and Charlie, then maybe that was enough. Still, I needed to confirm that the man I saw is Bob and that he was alive. So I boldly made a suggestion to Emily. "Why don't you come over to my place sometime?" Her face lit up instantly.
That sounds great.
I had to think carefully about how to approach the subject without hurting her. Until the day arrived, I kept going over it in my mind.
Hello.
Finally, the day came, and Emily arrived at my house. I knew she cared about me. But I couldn't leave the issue with Bob unresolved. It might seem cruel, but I deliberately placed a photo of Bob and Nancy smiling together on the shelf in the living room. Emily and Charlie happily entered the room, unaware of what was about to unfold. And when they saw the photo, their movements froze.
Huh? Is that Daddy?
Children are so honest. Charlie's surprised voice made Nancy respond.
That's Nancy's daddy.
Emily stared at Nancy's face, studying her closely. Nancy just smiled brightly.
Daddy used to take me to the ocean a lot when I was little.
The mention of the ocean made Emily visibly flinch.
What do you mean?
She looked confused. And Fo could blame her. It's hard to believe that her husband might be the father of her child's classmate. Seeing her in shock, I spoke gently. "I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. Will you hear me out?" I guided her to the sofa. "Nancy, Charlie, why don't you two go play in the other room? We have some grown-up stuff to talk about." Once I heard the kids' voices from the other room, I started telling Emily about Bob. How Bob was my son. How he had lived with me and Nancy after his divorce. And how he went missing after being swept away while fishing alone at the ocean. The memories were too painful, so we moved here. It's been 3 years now.
3 years ago. That's when he started working at my husband's company.
Emily seemed to be connecting the dots, comparing what I told her about Bob to her own memories of her husband. I explained how I saw the man running past the photo session on the first day of the school, and how shocked I was. When I finished, Emily, who had been looking down, lifted her gaze and met my eyes. There was no point in hiding the truth any longer. If I lied, I would only hurt her more. So, I told her the real reason I reached out to her. "I contacted you because I wanted to confirm if that man was my son, if he was Bob." Emily let out a deep sigh. "I'm sorry." I deeply apologized. There was no lie in my reason for approaching her. And it was true that I enjoyed spending time with her, but now, saying that felt like it would come off as shallow. So, I couldn't say anything else. The silence seemed to stretch on forever. Eventually, Emily spoke.
I'll ask my husband about it.
"What?" Emily continued to look at me as she spoke.
I'll ask if he remembers you and Nancy. if he really doesn't remember anything?
Honestly, I had expected her to call me a liar, so I stood there with my mouth open in surprise. Then, Emily chuckled softly.
I know you're not the kind of person who would lie, Rebecca.
She said it in her usual bright voice.
And no matter how we met, we're friends now, right?
What a generous, kind-hearted person. That's why I had grown to like her so much. I realized now that I had been relying on her more than I should have. It was finally clear to me. Thank you, but let me say just one thing. Then I made a suggestion to Emily. And she agreed. We both eagerly awaited the day to come. We chose a day when her husband would be back from his trip and the kids would be at school. The day arrived sooner than expected. After sending Nancy off to school, I waited at home for Emily and her husband. If it really was Bob, he would surely react when he saw me. I braced myself so I wouldn't miss that moment. Soon, the doorbell rang, and I opened the front door. Standing there were Emily and, unmistakably, the man who looked just like Bob. I invited them in and served coffee. So far, the man who seemed to be Bob showed no reaction. Even when he saw the picture of Nancy, he didn't seem the least bit disturbed. It was a photo of a man who looked exactly like him, yet there was no visible reaction. But he did seem a little restless. Maybe it was just because he was visiting someone's house for the first time, or maybe he was anxious to get out of this situation. I'm sorry for asking you over like this. I began, trying to gauge his response.
I've already told him a little about the situation.
It seemed they had discussed his memory loss before coming over.
I'm really sorry, but I don't think I'm your son.
He scratched his head apologetically. When I heard his voice, I knew for sure this man was Bob. I could never mistake my own son's voice. You might not remember, but you are definitely Bob, I said, hoping that meeting me might trigger some memory. It was my last hope.
If you really are my mother, don't you think it's strange that I can't remember anything while sitting right here, face to face with you?
For a moment, I thought I saw Emily flinch. I felt the same unease from his words. It was clear he wanted to leave as quickly as possible.
You know, Rebecca has been waiting for her only son to come home for so long.
Emily began to speak, but the man cut her off, raising his voice.
My family is just Emily and Charlie.
Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but even if that were the case, was there really a need to get that angry? Bob had always had a temper when things didn't go his way. Since he was little. Like when Nancy refused to go out and play, and he sulked as he left. I decided to push a little further. Then, what about this picture? I showed him a photo of Bob with Nancy. Does this bring back any memories? Bob slammed his hand on the table in frustration.
I don't remember. I don't know this child.
Without thinking, I immediately fired back. How can you say that about your own daughter? I knew I shouldn't corner someone who truly couldn't remember, but the words flew out of my mouth before I could stop them. I was shocked at my own reaction. Thinking of Nancy felt like a coy excuse for my outburst. After all, there was still a chance this man wasn't Bob. I should apologize. But before I could say anything, Bob muttered under his breath.
That woman who looked just like her left her too, didn't she?
Emily and I exchanged glances, then turned to Bob. He seemed startled, suddenly growing restless. So, the memory loss was a lie. Fidgeting when lying, that was another one of Bob's old habits.
I just remembered. Right now.
Emily let out a long, deep sigh.
You're a terrible liar.
Her voice was ice cold. Bob, tell us everything. As Emily and I pressed him, Bob finally confessed.
I just couldn't stand how much Nancy started looking like her.
It pained him to see Nancy's face grow more and more like his ex-wife's. The woman who had left him, taking up with another man after dumping their child on him. He admitted he was also frustrated with Nancy for not enjoying the outdoors like he did. He said it was true that he'd been swept away by the waves that day, but he had never actually lost his memory. When he was rescued, he decided to start a new life on his own.
Emily and Charlie are my perfect family.
A wife who goes along with whatever he wants, and a child who never complains when taken outside. That's where Bob said he found his place. As I listened to him, my head started spinning. How did my son, the one I raised, turn out to be so selfish?
So, Nancy has nothing to do with me anymore.
I clenched my fists. If he wanted to live his life alone, that was his choice. But I couldn't forgive him for disregarding Nancy. Just as I was about to grab him, Emily was already holding him by the collar. She glared at him.
What are you doing?
Bob's eyes filled with tears, shocked that the wife who had always been so obedient was now grabbing him by the shirt.
You're the worst.
Children shouldn't be tossed aside just because they don't fit their parents' ideals. To push Nancy away for something as shallow as her looks or her not behaving the way he wanted. There was nothing lower than that. Emily was speaking quickly with a firm attitude, and her meaning was clear. I never knew Emily had this side to her. Even I straightened up, feeling her intensity, as she yelled at Bob. Finally, she told him,
Don't ever come near me, Charlie, Rebecca, or Nancy again.
Bob, still desperate, clung to her.
I don't care. If you keep this up, I'll call the police.
That was the final blow. Defeated, Bob slunk away. In my heart, I applauded Emily. 3 months have passed since that day. Now, Emily, Nancy, Charlie, and I are at the beach together. For a while, Bob continued to bother Emily, but she made good on her word, and called the police. Bob's harassment eventually cost him his job when his company found out. No one knows where he is now. But he once said he wanted to live freely on his own, and with the nerve it took to lie about having no memory for years, he'd probably be fine. For me, it was better that way. I didn't want Bob anywhere near Nancy.
Honestly, when I think back on it, I feel so embarrassed.
Emily had completely dropped the act and was now showing her true self. It seems she grew up in a large family, and she was conscious about asserting herself clearly. But she no longer felt the need to hide it around us. Whenever she talked about that time with Bob, her face would turn bright red. I always thought Emily was a cheerful and easygoing person, but it turns out she's incredibly strong. That strength is probably why we've clicked so well. Even though our friendship started in such an unusual way, we're still close. Our trip to the beach during summer break, which also doubled as a celebration of my birthday, is proof of that.
Mom, come swim with us.
Charlie called out to Emily from the shoreline, with Nancy waving beside him. I'll watch your things for you, go on and have fun, I said to Emily, holding a can of beer.
All right, time for a swim.
She jumped up and ran over to the kids. I can't run around in the sun like that anymore. But just watching Emily, Charlie, and Nancy having fun is more than enough for me. From the outside, I wonder if we look like a family. If so, that would make me happy. Even though we're not related by blood, if we care for one another and share joyful moments, we're as good as family. As summer fades and the seasons change, I have a feeling we'll continue to be close. No matter what.